The porch light was off when I pulled into the driveway at 0230 hours. 3 days early from deployment, wanting to surprise Sarah with roses and that stupid grin she always said made me look like a kid on Christmas morning. But the bedroom window glowed amber against the October darkness, and something in my gut, the same instinct that kept me alive in Kandahar, whispered that surprises weren't always welcome. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, watching shadows move behind those curtains. 2 shadows, dancing together in ways that made my chest feel hollow. The roses lay forgotten on the passenger seat as I walked to the front door, my dress blues suddenly feeling like a costume I had no right to wear. Would you have walked in, or waited till morning? Subscribe and tell me in the comments, because what I did next changed everything. My name is Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, and for 15 years I've served this country with everything I had. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and more nights away from home than any marriage should survive. But I thought ours would. I thought Sarah understood that every sacrifice, every missed anniversary, every holiday spent in a foxhole instead of our kitchen, was for us. For the life we were building. We met at a veterans benefit in Austin back in 2019. She was volunteering, serving coffee to old-timers who needed someone to listen to their stories. I wasn't old then, 32 and still believing the world made sense. But something about the way she handed me that styrofoam cup, like it was fine china, made me want to tell her everything. About the sand that never quite washes out of your gear. About the weight of carrying your brothers home. About how the silence after gunfire sounds different than any other quiet in the world. Sarah had this way of listening that made you feel heard, not just observed. When I told her about the kids in Kabul who would run alongside our convoy, begging for chocolate, she cried. Not the performative tears people shed at war movies, but real ones, the kind that fall when someone truly understands that every story you tell is wrapped around the ones you can't. We married 8 months later in a small ceremony at the base chapel. No big wedding, just us, a few army buddies, and her parents who looked at my uniform like it was made of promises they weren't sure I could keep. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, something simple and white that made her look like light itself. During our vows, she said she knew she was marrying the army too, that she understood the job would always come first because that's what kept the world safe for people like her. I believed her. Hell, I needed to believe her. The early years were good. Between deployments, I'd come home to find she'd rearranged the furniture or planted new flowers, small improvements that said, "I was thinking of you while you were gone." She'd have my favorite beer in the fridge and would let me talk through the hard stuff at my own pace. Never pushed. Never demanded details I couldn't give. Just held space for whatever pieces of me made it back intact. She wrote letters during my second deployment, actual handwritten letters in that careful script she'd learned in Catholic school. Told me about her job at the elementary school, about the kids who reminded her of the ones I'd described from overseas. She'd include photos. Herself at the beach with her sister, the garden she was planning for spring, our dog Murphy wearing the ridiculous sweater she'd bought him. Normal life, waiting for me to return. I kept those letters in my pocket during patrol. When Jenkins stepped on that IED outside Kabul and we spent 6 hours pinned down by sniper fire, I read her words about the tomatoes she was growing and the way Murphy had learned to catch tennis balls. It reminded me that somewhere, life was still soft and good and worth protecting. But somewhere between my third deployment and coming home, something shifted. It started small. Sarah's letters became shorter, more generic. "Hope you're staying safe." Instead of, "I dreamed about you last night, and woke up missing the sound of your terrible morning voice." Phone calls felt rushed, like she was checking items off a list rather than talking to her husband. When I asked about her day, she'd give me bullet points instead of stories. I told myself it was natural. 5 years of marriage, 4 deployments, maybe we were just settling into a comfortable rhythm. Maybe the intensity of those early letters wasn't sustainable. Maybe she was protecting herself from missing me too much. But when I came home last Christmas, she felt different in my arms. Not physically. She looked beautiful as always, kept herself in shape, still turned heads when we went out. But there was a distance in her eyes, like she was looking through me instead of at me. During dinner, she'd check her phone constantly, claim it was work emails or her sister texting, but she'd angle the screen away from me. I'm a soldier. I notice things. The way she started showering immediately when she came home from work, before she even said hello. How she'd do laundry at odd hours, taking care of her own clothes separately. The fact that she bought new lingerie but I never saw her wear it. Small things that might mean nothing individually but together painted a picture I didn't want to develop. 3 weeks into leave, I found a receipt in her car for dinner at Romano's, that expensive Italian place downtown we'd only been to twice, both times for anniversaries. Dated 2 days prior, when she told me she was working late on lesson plans. Dinner for 2, with wine that cost more than most people spend on groceries. When I asked about it, she said she'd taken her friend Kelly out for her birthday. Plausible. Sarah was always thoughtful about celebrations. But when I called Kelly to see if Sarah had mentioned me being home, Kelly sounded confused. Said she'd been out of town that whole week visiting her sick mother in Dallas. That's when the military training kicked in. Pattern recognition. Threat assessment. Operational security. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. How she'd leave for school at her normal time but be gone longer than usual in the evenings. How she'd turned off location sharing on her phone, claiming it was draining the battery. The way she'd position herself during phone calls so I couldn't see the screen, even when I wasn't trying to look. There were new routines, too. She started going to a gym I'd never heard of, one across town from her school instead of the one 5 minutes away. Said she liked the yoga classes better, needed something more challenging. But when I offered to join her for a workout, she said it was her space, and she needed something that was just hers. I understood that. After years of living in close quarters with other soldiers, everyone needs space. But understanding didn't make it hurt less when my own wife treated me like an intrusion in the life she'd built while I was gone. The hardest part was how good she'd become at seeming normal. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, ask about my day when I came back from base, cook dinner and sit across from me at the table making conversation about safe topics. But it felt like she was acting the role of my wife rather than being her. I'd catch her staring out the window sometimes, lost in thoughts that had nothing to do with me or our life together. When I'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd smile and say, "Nothing important," or, "Just work stuff." But her smile never reached her eyes anymore. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. I was supposed to leave for a training exercise in Colorado, but it got cancelled last minute due to weather. Instead of calling Sarah to share the good news, I decided to surprise her. Thought I'd pick up flowers and that Thai food she loves and maybe we could have an unexpected evening together. Her car was in the driveway when I got home, but she wasn't in the house. I called her name, checked the backyard, even looked in the garage. Nothing. But her purse was on the counter, her jacket on the chair. Like she just vanished. I was starting to worry, had someone taken her, when I heard laughter from upstairs. Her laughter, but different. Lighter. More genuine than I'd heard in months. Following the sound, I found her on the bedroom floor, surrounded by photo albums, talking on the phone. I know, she was saying. But remember that time at the lake when you... She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. The joy drained from her face instantly, replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. "I have to go," she said into the phone. "Mike's home." She hung up quickly, started gathering the photos. But not before I saw they weren't our photos. They were pictures I'd never seen before. Sarah at places I'd never been, with people I didn't recognize, smiling in ways that made my chest feel tight. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "Kelly," she said automatically, but I'd already seen the name on her phone screen before she hung up. "David. Thought Kelly was still in Dallas with her mom." Sarah's hands stilled on the photographs. "Different Kelly," she said after a pause. "Work Kelly." I'd never heard her mention a work Kelly. But I nodded and helped her put the albums away, filing the lie alongside all the others that were starting to stack up between us. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling and tried to reconcile the woman I'd married with the stranger sharing my sheets. Sarah slept curled away from me, clutching her phone like it contained something more valuable than anything in our room. I'd fought in 3 war zones, lost brothers to IEDs and sniper fire, held dying men in my arms and somehow found the strength to keep going. But nothing had prepared me for the particular kind of combat happening under my own roof. That night, I knew my war had just begun. The next morning, Sarah kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened. Same routine, coffee in the blue mug I bought her in Germany, same quick peck on the cheek, same "Have a good day, honey." That sounded more like muscle memory than affection. But I watched her walk to her car differently now, noticing how she checked her phone before she even started the engine. I called in sick to base that day. First time in my entire career I'd lied to my commanding officer, but some battles require different tactics than others. By 0800 hours I was parked 3 blocks from Sarah's elementary school, watching her Honda Civic in the faculty parking lot through binoculars I'd brought back from Afghanistan. She didn't go inside. For 20 minutes she sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear, animated in ways I hadn't seen her in months. Laughing. Running her fingers through her hair the way she used to when we first started dating, and she was nervous excited about something. When she finally hung up, she sat for another 5 minutes just smiling at the phone screen before getting out and walking into the building. That smile haunted me all day. It was the smile I'd fallen in love with, the one that had convinced me to propose after 8 months, the one that had gotten me through my darkest nights overseas. Except now she was giving it to someone else. What hurts more, war or betrayal? Comment below and subscribe, because I'm about to show you the difference between fighting an enemy you can see and one sleeping in your bed. I drove home and did what any good soldier does when facing unknown enemy capabilities: reconnaissance. Started with her laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen table. Password protected, but Sarah had always been predictable with passwords. Our wedding date, Murphy's birthday, her mother's maiden name. I cycled through the usual suspects until Sarah D. 2019 unlocked the screen. David. Had to be David from the phone call. Her email was clean, too clean. Deleted items folder emptied, search history cleared. But people always forget about the autosave features, the cached files that linger in corners they don't think to check. 20 minutes of searching revealed fragments, partial email addresses, suggested contacts, file names that told stories she thought she'd erased. Beach_weekend_David_photos.zip. Dated 2 weeks ago, when she told me she was visiting her sister in Houston. Dinner_reservation_confirmation_Romanos. From last month, not the receipt I'd found, but the original email booking. Table for 2, romantic lighting, wine pairing menu. Special occasion. Anniversary celebration. Their anniversary. Not ours. I sat back in the kitchen chair, staring at evidence that transformed suspicion into certainty. This wasn't a recent thing, some momentary weakness or midlife crisis. This was deliberate, ongoing, carefully planned. She'd built an entire second life while I was overseas, defending the freedom that gave her the luxury of betraying me. The house suddenly felt different, like I was seeing it for the first time. How many nights had she brought him here while I was deployed? Had they slept in our bed, eaten at our table, laughed about the husband who was too stupid to notice? Every surface, every room, every space that represented our life together now carried the possibility of contamination. I found myself checking details I'd never paid attention to before. New sheets on the bed. When had those appeared? Wine glasses in the dishwasher, though Sarah rarely drank alone. A second toothbrush in the bathroom holder, blue instead of the red one I'd been using for years. When I asked her about it that evening, she said she'd bought it as a backup. "You know how I hate running out of things," she said, not meeting my eyes. I knew. Sarah was always prepared, always organized. But the blue toothbrush was a different brand than what we usually bought, softer bristles, the kind dentists recommend for sensitive gums. Sarah's gums weren't sensitive. Mine weren't either. Someone else's were. Over the next week, I developed what I privately called Operation Homefront. Every morning after Sarah left for school, I'd conduct systematic searches of our house, documenting evidence like I was building a case file for command. Because in a way, I was. The credit card statements revealed a pattern of charges I'd somehow missed during my brief leaves home. Restaurants I'd never been to, movie tickets for films we never watched together, gas station purchases in parts of town Sarah had no reason to visit. When I mapped the locations, they formed a clear pattern around the apartment complex where David apparently lived. David Martinez, as it turned out. Took me 3 days of cross-referencing social media, school district directories, and phone number searches to identify him. PE teacher at the middle school across town from Sarah's elementary. Divorced, 2 kids who lived with their mother in San Antonio, clean record, coached junior league baseball in his spare time. On paper, he looked like the kind of guy who'd help old ladies cross the street and volunteer at animal shelters. In photos, he looked like everything I wasn't. Where I was built like a soldier, angular, scarred, carrying weight in my shoulders from years of body armor, David was softer. Runner's build, easy smile, the kind of guy who probably never had nightmares about roadside bombs or the sound wounded men make when they know they're not going home. Sarah's type, apparently. Her original type, before she met a battle-hardened sergeant who carried too much gravity and not enough lightness. I found their text thread by accident, while Sarah was in the shower and her phone lit up with a notification on the nightstand. She'd gotten careless, or maybe comfortable, assuming I'd never look. The preview was innocent enough. Looking forward to tomorrow. But when I swiped it open, months of conversation spilled out like evidence from a crime scene. The early messages were cautious, professional. Scheduling meetings for some inter-school committee they were both on. But you could watch the progression, the slow slide from colleagues to friends to something more. Inside jokes developed. Good morning texts appeared. Then good night messages that grew longer, more intimate. I keep thinking about what you said at lunch today. You make me remember who I used to be before everything got so complicated. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are every single day, not just between deployments. I know this is crazy, but I can't stop thinking about you. The timestamp on that last message was from my second tour in Afghanistan. While I was pulling 12-hour shifts in 120-degree heat, dodging mortar fire and writing letters I hoped would make Sarah smile, she was falling in love with another man. I scrolled deeper, watching my marriage decompose in real time. The messages grew bolder, more explicit. Plans formed. Excuses were crafted. My deployment schedule was discussed like a weather report, obstacles to work around, opportunities to exploit. Mike's gone until Thursday. Want to cook dinner at my place? He's doing that training exercise in Colorado next month. Maybe we could finally take that weekend trip we talked about. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd met you first. That last one hit like a sniper's bullet, clean, precise, devastating. Sarah hadn't just cheated, she'd rewritten our entire history, imagined a different life where I was the mistake instead of David being the betrayal. I took screenshots of everything before closing the phone and placing it exactly where I'd found it. When Sarah came out of the bathroom, hair wrapped in a towel and humming something I didn't recognize, I was reading a book, looking like a husband waiting patiently for his wife to get ready for bed. Good shower? I asked. She said, already reaching for her phone. Just what I needed after such a long day. I watched her face change as she read David's message, whatever he'd sent to make her phone light up while she was washing his fingerprints off her skin. She smiled, typed a quick response, then looked at me with the kind of casual affection you'd show a familiar roommate. I'm exhausted, she said. Mind if I just go to sleep? Of course, I said. Sweet dreams. She kissed my forehead, a patronizing little peck that felt like being patted on the head by a stranger, and rolled over with her back to me. Within 10 minutes, she was breathing with the steady rhythm of someone whose conscience was perfectly clear. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and planning my next move. The following day, I implemented Phase 2 of Operation Homefront. If Sarah could build a secret life, I could build a secret investigation. I rented a storage unit across town and began gathering documentation. Printed emails, credit card statements, photographs, phone records, everything I'd need if this went to court. Because it would go to court. I wasn't the kind of man who walked away quietly, and Sarah wasn't getting to rewrite this story with herself as the victim. I also started following her. Not every day, I couldn't risk being obvious, but often enough to confirm what I already knew. She wasn't just texting David, she was living with him. 3 afternoons a week, she'd drive straight from school to his apartment complex and stay until nearly midnight. On weekends when I was on base, her car would be parked there overnight. The worst part was watching her transform during these visits. I'd position myself with a clear view of his apartment's front door and wait for her to emerge hours later. The woman who came out was different from the one who went in. Lighter. Younger. She'd practically skip down the stairs, car keys twirling around her finger like a teenager coming home from a first date. That was the Sarah I'd married. The one who found joy in small moments, who laughed easily and loved freely. Apparently, she still existed, just not for me. One Thursday evening, I decided to test her directly. Sarah had told me she was staying late for parent conferences, wouldn't be home until after 9. But I knew she'd be at David's apartment, probably cooking dinner in his kitchen, maybe wearing that red dress she claimed didn't fit anymore but somehow never threw away. I called her at 7:30. "Hey, honey," she answered, and I could hear music in the background. Something jazzy, intimate. Not the kind of music you'd have playing during parent conferences at an elementary school. "How are the meetings going?" I asked. "Oh, you know. Long day, lots of concerned parents. I'm just finishing up with the Hendersons now." Her voice was cheerful, practiced. She'd probably rehearsed this lie in her head while David was opening wine in the next room. "The Hendersons?" I said. "Aren't there kids in 3rd grade?" Pause. Brief, but I caught it. "That's right," Sarah said. "Little Tommy's been having some reading difficulties." "I thought Tommy Henderson was in Mrs. Wilson's class." "You teach 2nd grade." Another pause, longer this time. In the background, I heard a man's voice saying something I couldn't make out, then Sarah's hand covering the phone. "Sorry, what did you say?" she asked when she came back on the line. "Nothing important," I said. "Just wanted to hear your voice. I'll let you get back to your meeting." "Okay, love you." "Love you too." I hung up and drove to David's apartment complex. Sarah's Honda was parked in visitor spot 14, same place she'd been parking for months. The lights were on in apartment 2B, and through the thin curtains I could see 2 silhouettes moving around what looked like a kitchen. They were cooking together, dancing a little to that jazz music I'd heard over the phone. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching my wife play house with another man while lying to me about parent conferences that didn't exist for children who weren't in her class. That night, when Sarah came home at 10:15 claiming exhaustion from her long day with concerned parents, I was waiting in the living room with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might need to unwind," I said. She looked surprised, almost guilty. "That's sweet, but I'm really tired. Maybe tomorrow? The Hendersons kept you late, huh?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Very concerned about Tommy's progress. Must be frustrating, working with a student who's not even in your class." Sarah froze halfway up the stairs. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw the woman I'd married, the one who used to tell me everything, who couldn't lie to save her life, who wore her emotions like weather patterns across her face. Then the mask snapped back into place. "I meant the other Henderson boy," she said. "Jimmy. He's in my class." "Right," I said. "Jimmy Henderson." There was no Jimmy Henderson. Sarah knew it, and I knew it, and we both knew the other one knew it. But we played our roles anyway, the concerned teacher and the supportive husband, acting out a marriage that had become nothing more than shared living space and elaborate deception. That weekend, Sarah said she was going shopping with her sister in Austin. Needed some girl time, maybe get her nails done, do some early Christmas shopping. She'd be gone all day Saturday, probably wouldn't be back until evening. I told her I had duty at the base, would be running training exercises with new recruits. Might not be home until Sunday. We kissed goodbye in the driveway like actors ending a scene, both of us probably counting the minutes until we could drop the pretense. I followed her to David's apartment and watched her let herself in with her own key. Then I went home and searched our house one more time, looking for anything I might have missed. In her jewelry box, tucked behind the earrings I'd bought her for our second anniversary, I found a hotel keycard from the Marriott downtown. The magnetic strip was scratched from use, but the room number was still visible, 412. I drove to the hotel and sweet-talked the desk clerk, young kid, probably ex-military based on his posture and haircut. Told him I was trying to surprise my wife for our anniversary, that she'd mentioned staying in room 412 for some special occasion and I wanted to book the same room. He wasn't supposed to give out guest information, but when I showed him my military ID and spun a story about deployment and trying to be romantic, he softened up. Room 412 had been booked multiple times over the past 6 months. Always the same 2 names, Sarah Torres and David Martinez. Always weekend stays. Always charged to David's credit card. Lucky guy, the kid said. That room has the best view of the river. Real romantic. I thanked him and walked back to my truck, feeling hollowed out like a building after demolition. Sarah hadn't just been cheating, she'd been building a relationship, creating memories, establishing traditions with another man. They had their special room, their weekend getaways, their private jokes and shared experiences. All while I was serving my country and believing my wife was home missing me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Sarah with questions she'd just deny or deflect. I wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate the narrative or paint me as the paranoid, controlling husband. I was going to catch them in the act, document everything, and then destroy both of their lives with the same precision I'd once used to neutralize enemy targets. I had fought enemies abroad. Now I was preparing for the enemy at home. The plan came together like a military operation, precise, methodical, with contingencies for every possible outcome. I'd spent 3 weeks gathering intelligence, and now it was time for the final assault. But first I needed backup. I called my lawyer on Monday morning. James Rodriguez had handled my will before my last deployment, knew my situation, understood military benefits and divorce procedures. When I told him what I'd discovered, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mike, you sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said. "I need everything documented properly. I want her to lose everything, the house, the savings, her reputation. All of it. Texas is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still impact property division and spousal support. If you've got solid evidence—" "I've got everything," I interrupted. "Photos, texts, hotel records, witness statements. Enough to bury them both. Would you forgive or destroy? Tell me in the comments and subscribe for tomorrow's story, because what I did next changed everything." James walked me through the legal strategy. Texas law allowed me to claim all marital assets if I could prove Sarah had wasted community property on her affair, and those hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts to David definitely qualified. I could also pursue alienation of affection claims, though James warned those were harder to win. "The key is documentation," he said. "Everything has to be admissible in court. No illegally obtained evidence, no entrapment, nothing that makes you look like the bad guy." That Tuesday, I took leave from base and drove to Austin to hire a private investigator. Marcus Webb, former Army Ranger turned civilian PI, came highly recommended by another sergeant whose wife had cheated with a contractor overseas. Webb was professional, discreet, and understood the military mindset. "I can get you photos, video, detailed reports of their activities," he said after I explained the situation. "But are you sure you want to see everything? Sometimes ignorance is kinder than truth." "I've seen worse things than my wife fucking another man," I said. "Get me everything." Webb nodded, recognizing something in my voice that probably reminded him of his own military days. "What's your timeline?" 2 weeks. I want to end this on our anniversary." Our 6th anniversary was coming up on November 15th. Sarah had already suggested we go to that new steakhouse downtown, maybe make a weekend of it. I'd agreed, knowing it would be the perfect stage for what I had planned. Webb delivered his report exactly 2 weeks later. 300 pages of surveillance photos, video timestamps, phone records, financial documentation, and witness statements. Sarah and David's entire relationship laid out in clinical detail. Every hotel visit, every romantic dinner, every lie she told to cover their meetings. The photos were the hardest part. Not because they were explicit. Webb was professional enough to focus on establishing presence and timeline rather than bedroom activities, but because they showed Sarah happy in ways I hadn't seen in years. Laughing at something David said over dinner, holding his hand while walking through the park, kissing him goodbye in his apartment doorway with the kind of tenderness she used to reserve for me. In one photo, taken at the hotel bar, Sarah was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for our 3rd anniversary. She was looking at David the way she used to look at me when I'd come home from deployment, like I was the most important person in her world. Now I was just the inconvenience she had to manage between the moments that actually mattered to her. Webb's report also included background information on David that made my blood run cold. Turned out he'd been through this before. His ex-wife had divorced him for adultery with a teacher from his previous school. Pattern behavior, same playbook, target married women, play the sensitive, understanding friend, gradually escalate until they left their husbands. Sarah wasn't his first victim. She probably wouldn't be his last. But she would definitely be his most expensive mistake. On November 10th, 5 days before our anniversary dinner, I implemented the final phase. I'd booked the same restaurant where Sarah wanted to celebrate, made reservations for 3 tables instead of 1. Our table, David's table, which he didn't know he'd be occupying, and a table for witnesses. I invited Sarah's parents, her sister, my commanding officer and his wife, and 3 couples from our neighborhood. Told them all I wanted to surprise Sarah with a big anniversary celebration, that she deserved recognition for all the sacrifices she'd made as a military wife. Everyone was thrilled to help celebrate our perfect marriage. I also sent David a special invitation. Had it delivered to his school with a formal request to attend an educational appreciation dinner, honoring outstanding teachers who supported military families. The invitation was professionally printed, included his full name and accomplishments, made it seem like a district-wide recognition event. Told him Sarah Torres would be receiving a special award for her dedication to military spouses, and his presence was requested as a fellow educator who'd helped support her during her husband's deployments. The irony was perfect. David thought he was coming to watch Sarah get honored for being a good military wife. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. November 15th arrived gray and cold, typical Texas autumn weather that matched my mood perfectly. Sarah spent the afternoon getting ready, doing her hair and makeup with more care than she'd shown for anything involving me in months. She kept checking her phone, probably texting David about how much she was dreading this boring dinner with Mike's military friends. "You look beautiful," I told her when she came downstairs in that blue dress, the same one from Webb's surveillance photos. "Thank you," she said, but she was already reaching for her purse, eager to get this over with. "Ready to go?" We arrived at the restaurant at 7 sharp. Sarah seemed surprised by how crowded it was, how many people were already seated at various tables. I guided her to our table in the center of the dining room, perfectly positioned so everyone could see us clearly. "Wow," she said, looking around nervously. "I didn't realize this place would be so busy tonight." "Anniversary dinner at a good restaurant," I said. "Figured we should do it right." Her parents arrived first, followed by her sister Jenny and her husband. Sarah brightened. She hadn't seen her family in months, claimed she'd been too busy with work to make time for visits. More lies, I realized. She'd been too busy playing house with David to maintain relationships with people who actually mattered. My CO and his wife came next, then the neighbors, then several other couples I'd invited. Soon our section of the restaurant was filled with people who loved and respected Sarah, who believed in our marriage, who had no idea they were about to witness the complete destruction of everything they thought they knew about us. David arrived at 7:30, looking confused but trying to hide it. He was dressed nicely, dark suit, conservative tie, the kind of outfit a teacher would wear to a professional recognition dinner. He kept looking around, probably wondering where the other honored educators were, why this seemed more like a family gathering than a district event. I watched him from across the room, studying the man who'd stolen my wife with the same intensity I'd once reserved for enemy combatants. He was exactly what I'd expected, soft where I was hard, smooth where I was scarred, comfortable where I carried the weight of things that couldn't be unseen. When David spotted Sarah at our table, his face went white. For a moment they made eye contact across the crowded restaurant, and I saw panic flash between them like a shared secret. Sarah's hand went to her throat, that nervous gesture she'd always made when caught off guard. "I'll be right back," Sarah said, starting to stand. "Actually," I said, placing my hand on her arm with gentle firmness, "I think our guests should join us." I stood and walked across the restaurant to David's table. He watched me approach with the wariness of prey animal sensing a predator. "David Martinez," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Mike Torres, Sarah's husband." He shook my hand automatically, his grip weak and sweaty. There seems to be some confusion. I was invited to an educational appreciation dinner." "No confusion," I said. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Why don't you join us? Sarah would love to see you." I guided him back to our table before he could protest. Sarah's face had gone pale, but she managed a weak smile as I pulled out a chair for David right next to her. "Everyone," I said, standing behind my wife and her lover, "I'd like you to meet David Martinez. He's been very supportive of Sarah during my deployments." The conversation at the table faltered. Sarah's mother looked confused. Jenny frowned, clearly sensing something was wrong but not understanding what. My CO's wife smiled politely, extending her hand to David in greeting. "It's so nice to meet Sarah's friends," she said. "She talks about you all the time." "Actually," I said, "David isn't just a friend." "Are you David?" David looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah reached for her water glass with shaking hands. "Mike," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" "I'm celebrating our anniversary," I said. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of me believing in us while you were building something else entirely." The table went completely silent. Other diners were starting to notice the tension, conversations at nearby tables dropping to whispers as people sensed drama unfolding. Sarah's father leaned forward. "Mike, what's going on here?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documentation. 6 months ago, I started noticing changes in my wife. Little things at first, new habits, unexplained absences, lies about where she'd been. Being a soldier, I decided to investigate. Sarah was shaking now, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Please don't do this here." "Where would you prefer?" I asked. "At home, where you've been lying to me every single day. At his apartment, where you spend more time than in our house. Or maybe at the Marriott, room 412, where you've been playing house with your boyfriend while I was serving our country?" The words hit the table like grenades. Sarah's mother gasped. Jenny's husband sat back in his chair, understanding dawning on his face. My CO watched with the stern expression of a man who'd seen his share of military marriages destroyed by infidelity. David tried to stand. "I should go." "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice, probably the same tone I'd used to give orders in combat zones, made him obey immediately. I opened the envelope and began laying photos on the table. Not the intimate ones, I wasn't cruel, but the ones that established timeline and relationship. David and Sarah holding hands at the park. Kissing goodbye at his apartment. Entering the hotel together. Having dinner at Romano's while she told me she was working late. 18 months, I said. "That's how long this has been going on. While I was in Afghanistan, dodging bullets and writing letters to the woman I thought was faithfully waiting for me, she was falling in love with someone else." Sarah was crying openly now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of being caught, of having her carefully constructed double life exposed in the most humiliating way possible. "Mike, please," she whispered. "Can we talk about this privately? We're past private conversations, I said. You lost that privilege when you started fucking him in our bed. Several people at the table flinched at the crude language, but I was beyond caring about social niceties. This woman had made a fool of me while I was risking my life for my country. She deserved every moment of this public humiliation. I turned to David, who looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Tell me, how does it feel to be the kind of man who targets military wives? Was it the challenge of stealing from someone who couldn't defend his territory? Or do you just get off on destroying families? It wasn't like that, David said weakly. No? Then what was it like? I leaned closer to him, using every inch of height and military bearing to intimidate him. Were you thinking about my service record when you were unbuttoning her dress? Did you consider that I might come home in a box, and then where would your relationship be? Sarah's father stood up abruptly. That's enough, Mike. Whatever's happened between you and Sarah, this isn't the way to handle it. Isn't it? I turned to face him. Your daughter made vows to me in front of God and our families. She promised to honor me, to be faithful, to support me while I served our country. Instead, she's been living a double life, spending our money on hotel rooms and dinners with her boyfriend, lying to everyone who trusted her. I pulled out the financial records, spread them across the table. $23,000 of our savings spent on this affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts, weekend trips. Money I earned putting my life on the line, money we were supposed to use for our future, our house, maybe children someday. Sarah's sister Jenny was staring at the documentation with horror. Sarah, is this true? Sarah couldn't answer. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, the perfect image of a wife caught in the worst kind of betrayal. David made another attempt to leave. This is between you and your wife. You should shut up and listen, I said. Because you're not walking away from this. I know about your ex-wife, David. I know you've done this before. You're a predator who targets married women, and Sarah was just your latest victim. That got everyone's attention. David's face went red, but he couldn't deny it because it was true. I continued, addressing the entire table now. David Martinez was divorced 3 years ago for adultery. He cheated on his wife with another teacher, destroyed that family, and then moved here to start fresh. Sarah wasn't the love of his life. She was just available and vulnerable and married to someone who couldn't fight back. The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet. Other diners were openly staring now, sensing they were witnessing something dramatic and terrible. Several people had their phones out, probably recording. Sarah finally found her voice. I loved him, she said through her tears. It wasn't just an affair. I love him. You love him? I repeated. Do you love him enough to lose everything for him? I pulled out the divorce papers, already prepared and signed by my attorney. Because that's what's happening. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. You'll get nothing, no alimony, no property settlement, nothing. Texas law is very clear about adultery and the wasting of community assets. Sarah's mother reached across the table to touch her daughter's hand. Honey, maybe you should get a lawyer. She'll need one, I agreed. Because I'm also filing alienation of affection claims against David. Did you know that's still illegal in some states? And since David knowingly pursued a married woman whose husband was deployed overseas, there might be some interesting publicity around that. David finally spoke up, desperation making his voice crack. Sarah, we should go. Together? I asked. That's perfect. Because you should know, David's apartment lease is up next month, and somehow his landlord got an anonymous tip about unauthorized overnight guests violating the single occupancy clause. He'll be homeless soon. Hope you two found somewhere else to play house. That was a lie, but David didn't know that. I watched him process the information, watched him realize that his comfortable little life was about to become very complicated. Sarah stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this. I can't sit here and let you destroy everything. I'm not destroying everything, I said calmly. You already did that. I'm just making sure everyone knows what you did. She looked around the table at her family, at our friends, at the neighbors who'd always respected her as a military wife. The shame in her eyes was complete, not because she cheated, but because she'd been caught so thoroughly that no story or excuse could save her reputation. "Come on, David," she said. "Let's go." David hesitated, probably calculating whether Sarah was worth the complete destruction of his career and reputation. In that moment of hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know about their relationship. When things got difficult, when consequences became real, he would abandon her just like he'd abandoned his ex-wife. "Actually," David said, not meeting Sarah's eyes, "I think I should go home. Alone." The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at him, understanding finally that she'd destroyed her marriage for a man who wouldn't even stand by her when she needed him most. "David?" she whispered. He was already standing, reaching for his coat. "I'm sorry, Sarah. This is too much. I never wanted it to go this far." And there it was. The man she'd risked everything for was abandoning her at the first sign of real consequences. Sarah stood alone in the middle of a crowded restaurant, her marriage destroyed, her lover fleeing, her reputation in ruins, with nothing left but the wreckage of choices she couldn't undo. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity. Then I remembered the lies, the months of deception, the way she'd smiled at him in those surveillance photos while treating me like an inconvenience. The pity died. "Your belongings will be packed and ready for pickup tomorrow," I told her. "Everything of yours, nothing of mine. The locks will be changed by Monday." Sarah's father stepped forward. "She can stay with us while this gets sorted out." "That's generous," I said. "She'll need somewhere to go while she figures out her next move. The teaching job probably won't last once word gets around about her affair with a colleague. Small town, you know how people talk." Sarah finally found some fight left in her. "You bastard. You're destroying my entire life over a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated. 18 months of deliberate deception, thousands of dollars of betrayal, building an entire secret relationship while your husband was serving overseas. That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's who you are." I gathered up the photos and documents, putting them back in the envelope. "But you're right about one thing. I am destroying your life. Just like you destroyed ours." I turned to address the table one final time. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I wanted you to witness this because Sarah and I have been living a lie for months, and I thought the people who cared about us deserved to know the truth." My commanding officer stood up, extending his hand to me. "Mike, if you need anything, time off, counseling, legal support, the Army takes care of its own." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." I looked at Sarah one last time. She was still crying, but there was anger in her tears now. Anger at being caught, anger at being humiliated, anger at losing everything she'd taken for granted. "I did love you," I said quietly. "That's what makes this so unforgivable." I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Sarah sobbing, her family trying to comfort her, other diners returning to their conversations with the excitement of people who'd witnessed real drama. The cold November air felt clean after the stuffiness of the restaurant. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, watching through the windows as Sarah's family helped her gather herself together. David was long gone, probably already calling his landlord to see about extending his lease, already calculating how to distance himself from the wreckage he'd helped create. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Sarah got nothing, no alimony, no property settlement, no claim to my military benefits or pension. The house, the savings, everything we'd built together stayed with me. Texas law was clear: when one spouse wastes community assets on an affair, the faithful spouse gets to keep everything else. Sarah moved back in with her parents in Dallas. Last I heard, she was working as a substitute teacher, barely making ends meet. David transferred to a school district in Houston, probably looking for fresh hunting grounds and new victims. I kept the house but sold most of the furniture. Too many memories of Sarah moving through those rooms, cooking in that kitchen, sleeping in that bed. I bought new everything, furniture that was mine alone, dishes she'd never touched, sheets that carried no ghosts. The army offered counseling, and I took it. Not because I felt guilty about what I'd done to Sarah, I didn't, but because carrying that much anger was bad for my health and my career. It took months to work through the betrayal, to understand how completely I'd been deceived, to rebuild my ability to trust my own judgment. 6 months after the divorce, I got orders for a new assignment in Germany. Fresh start, new base, people who didn't know my story or look at me with the mixture of pity and respect that comes from being the wrong party in a very public betrayal. The night before I left Texas, I drove past David's old apartment complex. New tenants in 2B, probably a young couple just starting out, full of hope and trust and belief that love conquers all. I hoped they'd be smarter than I was. I hoped they'd recognize the signs before it was too late. Some evenings now, sitting on my new porch in Germany, watching the sun set over unfamiliar landscape, I think about the man I used to be before Sarah's betrayal. More trusting, more willing to believe in happy endings, carrying less armor around my heart. That man died in a restaurant in Texas, executed by truth and witnessed by people who thought they knew us. I buried him with the marriage certificate and the photos of better days, and I don't miss him as much as I probably should. The man I am now is harder, more careful, less willing to give anyone the power to destroy me from the inside. He's a good soldier, a reliable friend, a man who keeps his word and expects others to keep theirs. He's also completely, permanently, and contentedly alone. War taught me that some battles leave scars that never fully heal. Betrayal taught me that the worst wounds come from friendly fire, delivered by someone close enough to aim for your heart. Sarah chose David over our marriage, over her vows, over the life we'd built together. David chose self-preservation over love when consequences arrived. I chose justice over mercy, destruction over forgiveness, truth over comfortable lies. We all got exactly what we deserved.